We're now going to segue into our next panel, Southern Futurism, which I'll be moderating and participating in. I came across this term online while researching the Southern Gothic, which is central to my own work. And suddenly all these light bulbs started going on in my brain because we always reference the South as a place rooted in its past, but everyday Southern artists are using the past to shape a Southern future. So with that, I would love to invite the panelists I'll be in conversation with to the virtual stage. Faren, Rodneya Hart, MJ Slide, and Daneeta Loretta Jackson. Welcome. Well, before we dive in, I would love for each of you in your own words to introduce yourselves and your work and, what's important to you. And so I am going to start with Faren.
Hi, thank you, Zandashé, for putting this all together. I'm thankful to be a part of the Southern Summit. I'm a filmmaker. I represent Miami and I represent Sanderson, Florida. I have ties to the extremities of Florida, South Florida, and its northern rural culture as well. And I make films that explore and interrogate the various tenets of the South that I was raised and exposed to. And currently, I would say as of late, the last 3 years, duration has been an interest of mine, and it's taken up more space and intention in my work, particularly probably what we'll be talking about today. For the past 3 years, I've been working in Liberty Square. It's a community in Liberty City, Miami. And I'm interested, it's a community within a public housing site, the oldest and largest in the Southeast. And right now they're going through reconstruction, redevelopment. The residents are being phased out, and that is to say, being displaced and dispossessed of their homes. And so the work that I'm doing is collaborating with residents, asking them about their memories, their dreams, their interests, really anything, any preoccupation of theirs, and delving into it, trying to come upon all of the enduring acts, the durational moments of this community as a way to posit what can take us to the next steps and the next moments, and we'll just a dot right there.
That's a perfect summary. Thank you, Faren. I'll pass it off to Daneeta.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, my name's Daneeta Loretta Jackson. I'm from Big Branch, Louisiana. So I just love that Kayla is from Mandeville. Big Branch is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Mandeville. And I'm white and I'm a 9th generation Louisianan, which means that my family were the colonizers and the enslavers. And I kind of ran away from all of that as an artist. So I was outside of Louisiana for a really long time. And then when Hurricane Katrina happened, all of my family that were still here and all my friends, I went to Loyola University for undergrad, they basically lost everything. So we decided, my husband and I, who's from Sweden, and I met in London where I was living before, we decided to come back here and try to start making films that were with and for my literal Louisiana family. So a lot of the films that I make actually feature my family members in there. But then I like to expand it out to all of Louisiana. And going back to the sort of colonizers and enslavers, there are still very few progressives in my huge extended family. And many of them are oil workers and climate change deniers. And most of my films are about what I call climate apocalypse, because I really don't think that we're going to make it, y'all. That's my futurism. It's not going so well. We've lost it. And the science tells us that we're going to lose Southeast Louisiana. There's nothing we can do about it. So what I'm trying to do is talk to my people. So I'm trying to talk to them to make them understand what's going to happen and how it's going to go down, and try to get them through making reparations for, the past, and then also get them to move through this climate apocalypse that we're witnessing right now. Most of my films are hybrid. As I said, they feature my family and playing fictionalized versions of themselves, basically it's fictionalized versions of themselves, all about climate apocalypse. So I'll just end it there and mute myself.
Thank you, Daneeta. And Rodney, I'll pass it over to you.
Unmute. Okay, so my name is Rodneya Hart. I'm the division director for the State Museum System. I'm over 4 museums within Louisiana that are all of the non-New Orleans museums. I have a love and passion for all things history, art, science, literature, and Black representation and equality. And I kind of coined this term Southern Futurism for an exhibition that I put on in 2015. And it combines a lot of things that I think are really important to me and my identity, but also speak to a larger understanding. I am a Louisiana native, and I love to make this world better because I'm in it.
Thank you so much, Rodney. And I hope you'll share a bit about how you coined that term later too. And then MJ, I'll pass it along and say that MJ won our South Pitch last year at New Orleans Film Festival. And so after their intro, they have a little teaser for the film that was pitched that we're so excited to share. So I'll let you intro that, MJ.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here. My name is MJ, they, them pronouns. I primarily work in commercial and narrative film as a first assistant director. But I also, in this sort of more hyper indie sphere, work as a writer, director, producer, kind of just a multi-hyphenate. Like, I try not to go on about it all because it just gets really lengthy. But really, it's just like finding the ways to be resourceful to make the things happen and satisfy my insatiable curiosity. As far as the project that y'all are gonna take a look at today, it's called E is 4. It's a Black queer science fiction film set in the South. It's sort of a love letter to all of the things that make the South both complicated and beautiful through the lens of just a Black queer person within that. And I'm from upstate South Carolina, specifically Greenville, and exploring sort of the narrative of course, I'm going to draw a blank now in classic form. But really just like trying to hone in on the mechanisms of science fiction, which is sort of the genre that has, for all intents and purposes, kept me alive. Being able to see and look at this genre and find the outsiders and find the people who don't fit, just sort of the misfits and the weirdos, and connecting with that, but also really being able to lean into the sense of camaraderie that exists within those spaces and the care that we offer each other. And then it's also a love letter to recovery, as going on 2.5 years sober and exploring that and how many of the relationships that have mattered in that spaces, and then a sort of a send off to platonic intimacy. So there's a lot going on in the film. So there's just a lot. It's a really complicated character study, I guess, if we were going to simplify it. But yeah, so that's sort of the overview of that. And then we've got a 1-minute sort of very moody teaser reel to show y'all.
Great, thank you. Len, if we could cue that clip. Thank you for sharing that, MJ. Y'all are getting a look at, this is the first time that anyone is seeing this outside of the editing team. So a little something special there. And so before we get into the conversation, we have a lot to talk about. I'll briefly introduce myself to you all as a filmmaker because I've been on the arts administration side of it for South Summit. My name is Zandashé Brown. I'm a writer and director originally from Rosedale, Louisiana, who spent a lot of time growing up in Baton Rouge and is now thankful to call New Orleans home. But my work is focused on honoring and extending the canon of Black Southern Gothic, specifically Black Southern Gothic horror. And so anything around speculative fiction is really interesting to me. We had a lot of conversations earlier about the archives and lineage and family history, and those things play such an important part into my own work and spirituality. And I think they link to this conversation as well in ways that I'm interested in talking about you all with. So to kick it off, I kind of just want to know how each of you define Southern Futurism. And Rodneya, I'll start with you because as I mentioned earlier, I was searching Southern Gothic and came across an exhibition on Southern Futurism. And I just thought, wow, like how contradictory, for most of us. So can you tell us a bit about that and how you define it?
Sure. So I did this exhibition at the Healthcare Gallery in 2015. And I just noticed that when we talk about the American South, it's always steeped in history and historical overtones of slavery, of oppression, of lack of opportunity, decades of Black disenfranchisement. And I wanted to think of an exhibition that was a little more hopeful. um, I had been researching the 20th century Italian futurists, and they were looking at technology. They were right at the precipice of it kind of entirely swallowing their world, and so they questioned the human condition, the universal role of dynamism, which it kind of reminded me of like quantum mechanics and entanglement and how we're not truly separate from anything. They use that in Russian Cubo-futurism, and also we see a lot in Afrofuturism, that it's this forward momentum, it's this dynamic energy, it's what is the future, how can we portray it through art, culture, culinary world, but I wanted to see what Baton Rougeans and people from the South at large came to understand when they thought about the South, but not just what was, but what could be. And so I see this understanding of technology, science, fiction, science and fiction, and science fiction. A cross section of imagination, technology, and future liberation, freedom of movement. So much of what I do is steeped in preservation and history, as working in historical museums. So to imagine a future where things are not prescribed and you are taking the pain and the history of the present and the past, but you're creating something brand new. And so that is what really I think of when I think of Southern Futurism. And it's not utopia, but it's also not a post-apocalyptic world. Instead, it's a creature of our own making.
Thank you so much, Rodneya. That's beautiful. Faren, what about you? How do you interpret that phrase?
Well, thank you for introducing it to me because it is, that's what it was, an introduction. And thank you, Rodneya, for conceptualizing it and, putting it into a form for us to reckon with. And just as you're talking, I'm like chewing on all these concepts that you're saying. So for a lot of this that I'm communicating is just coming from like a place of positing, really, and all this like newness that y'all are bringing to me. So thank you. Well, like how I approach time is and I think what makes duration so interesting to me and why I can just like live in it all the time is because it just like presents the continuum of time. And so it's like everything is so interconnected and our future is contingent on the past. And duration is just like this active place where all of that coalesces and you just get to be a witness of it and like watch what percolates from this like merging of all of these various perspectives of time. So that's what I'm thinking about, or that's like really what is like what holds me when I'm thinking about duration and when I'm thinking about futurism too. There's not much difference from past. It's just relational, really, for me. So listening to Kayla Martinez and also listening to Rodneya, just like Kayla said, like, is it the sweet biscuits or the Southern jazz? Like, and I'm forgetting like the specific things that you said in particular, Rodneya, but y'all just made me think about perhaps a lot of what is going on with Southern culture and what we call as tradition and like sticking to the past is really more so about more so like a protective stance of what is brought into the future. And so y'all are like making me reckon with all of that. And that might be informing some of what I'm doing with the work that I'm exploring now in Liberty Square. So it's like two companion pieces that I have. One is a hybrid film where I'm working with residents and they're talking about their dreams. We're having these personal interviews and they're doing interpersonal interviews. They're going around with cameras. Some of them are recording their dreams if they feel like it. Most of them are not. But what's the first for me and what I think like ties into this, that's all coming to me now in this conversation, is that I'm pulling those in order to find the roadmap of, you know, what to do, the blueprint for the future. And so again, just like not looking at archival as just these like fixtures of the past, but you know, their interrelation and their necessity for our plans for what's next. And a lot of that is just my position of, I don't know, I don't have the answers when we're in these like huge moments of crises of displacement and dispossession from developers that just like, not only do they don't care, they don't have to care, just in terms of power. And so it's just like, what do you resort to? You resort to what you've traversed and like, how do you use it and what do you use it for? And so you use it for what is next, because the now just seems so like wasted. So I've landed on that, using the past in order to figure out some imaginary next for us.
Faren, you worked through these thoughts so eloquently. Thank you. Thank you. Daneeta, you mentioned that you were pessimistic about the future, and I don't blame you for it, but I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more about that and how Southern futurism falls into that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm generally a pessimistic person to begin with. I know a lot of people don't admit that, but I admit it. And I think pessimists kind of find themselves in a reality, whereas optimists kind of look for something that's bigger than reality. And I appreciate that. But I tell you, with COVID, I'm really I've been having a difficult time imagining a future, just period, imagining a future, period. And that's a problem for me as an artist, because that's kind of our job, is to try to imagine the future. But what I really love, Rodneya, that you just said was that we have a future of our own making. And just when I think about that, sort of the environmental injustice that has happened here in Louisiana, the fact that we're going to lose it, you know, I'm just trying to figure out like how we are going to move forward with this. And it does have something to do with making reparations, and also like admitting that there has been you know, that this place has been destroyed by capitalism, by extraction, and by exploitation, and that we've used you know, I mean, when I say we, I'm talking about the power brokers have used, you know, the poor, the disenfranchised, people of color, indigenous folks to do this. They've used their physical labor to do this. And that is just so, I think when I think back on archive and using archive in a different way, like in Homeland Wetland, the way that we used archive is we used a lot of actually fictional clips as archive. Sometimes I think that we tell these stories to ourselves, when, you know, that are a fiction. Like obviously white people have been telling a fiction to themselves for you know, 400 years, for forever. So I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to drag my people into the light, to just say like, look, y'all, this is happening right here in front of us. I know you're working for the oil company. I know you're getting your money from the oil company, but this is happening right here around us. So I guess I'm trying to get my community around me to help me to imagine a better future, to imagine something, like you said, Rodneya, that's not necessarily utopian, but at least is something that we can grab onto and move forward, even if we are going to lose this place. You know, even if we're going to have to flip all of our houses and make them amphibious, and we're going to be living in a, you know, in a water city where we let the water in. But yeah, I guess I'm still trying to figure it out, honestly. And that's why I honestly accepted to talk at this, because I wanted to hear what everybody else had to say and to try to see if I could figure it out by having these conversations. So appreciate all of you, and I appreciate all of what I'm hearing.
Thank you, Daneeta. Thank you. MJ, would you like to weigh in on Southern Futurism?
Yeah, no, I think it's I kind of have this policy in a lot of my work, is that everything is kind of beautiful and interesting and fucked up all at once, and it just kind of ebbs and flows. It's like I was having a really, really bad week, and I was on a Zoom call, and the other person on the other end was like, the sky was magenta tonight, and that was just like the sky doing sky things, not because we messed something up. And it's like, you can be in the middle of a pandemic, but the sky is still magenta. And I feel like there's these elements specifically in the South where it's like, yeah, I am worried about getting on my bike and riding in certain neighborhoods because I know it's not safe for somebody who looks like me. But then I can look up and I can see all of these old growth trees and all of these trees that have been here forever, and the textiles factory, like the textile mills and everything that just like gets in under your skin and your bones. And then you find people who can see both that beauty and the brokenness, a lot like what Kayla said. So I think for me, Southern Futurism isn't if it's going to get worse, because it gets worse. It just kind of shifts and changes. Sort of like I've also been told by I'm currently residing in Detroit, and I've been told by many folks that the term fuck shit is apparently a Southern thing. I was like, cool, all right. I mean, I feel like it's a great combination of words to summarize a lot of things. But like that whole energy of, okay, we got to be prepared for the fuck shit because we know that it's going to come. And if anything, our history, specifically in the South, has showed us that this is not an avoidable thing. And it also sort of ties in a lot to Octavia Butler's work too, where it's like, she is very much about, it's going to get bad, have a plan. And so even like with ease, for a lot of the a lot of the revolutionary mechanisms that are being spoken of or seen on screen is a lot of skilling up. One of the main characters is a street medic. It's like learning and sharing these skills for survival, but also for rest, for like creating spaces for joy, and things that are like quintessentially Southern. I lived in LA for 2 years and couldn't have a bonfire, and I felt like my insides were dying. Like it was just like the way to like the elements of community. So I feel like Southern Futurism is taking all of the things that like all of the nonsense that we've been through before, having that inform the things that are going to be ahead, but also not forgetting like that joy that we have, and that sort of just that toughness and resourcefulness, and just kind of rough around the edges, and also just leaning into the fact that so much of the culture that's held in high regard all across the world comes from us, and having that heritage and having that legacy and being able to sort of rest in that, and like Kayla said, it's like there's so many queer people in the South, and finding those spaces of community, and having like knowing that like LA and New York and Chicago all get the sort of the main spotlight, but the work that queer folks are doing in the South to take care of each other is specific to the South, and we know what our folks need, and we can take and we can learn from things from places like skills and mechanisms that have been sort of tried and tested in other like regions, and figure out how to customize those things towards what the South needs. I think there was the way that we shot ES4, and I can go into a little bit of that later. I feel like probably wouldn't have happened anywhere else. The type of like homies help homies make movies kind of energy, and I can sort of I can elaborate on that later, but there's definitely something where we knew there were specific things that were like, oh hell yeah, like where this is Southern tried and true, and no shade, because a lot of us have lived other places, but we keep coming back, because it's like that's where home is complicated. And I think again, Kayla said it really well. Home is very complicated, but it's still home, and we're going to make it better, and we are. And even if that means, like Daneeta said, it's like, yeah, we're going to still have community even if we all live on houseboats, and we're going to have these things. We're going to lean into those things because it's still ours, and we love it, and we're going to protect it any way that we can.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for just helping to imagine that. And you mentioned Octavia Butler. There was no way that her name was not going to come up during this panel, but it segues us into my next question, because I want to ask how some of the things that we're talking about present themselves in your work. And I'll say that, you know, Octavia, oops, sorry, somebody needs to mute. Please mute really quick if you're not speaking. Octavia Butler, she's always been one of my greatest inspirations, and as she is for so many people. And through her writing, she seemingly predicted the future, which is really our present, you know, speaking to just what Faren mentioned earlier about duration and how it's coming from perspective. And she did this all by watching the news. She said in interviews, she was from Pasadena, but she had her family had Southern roots, and I think they really present themselves in her writing and how she uses what we understand as speculative fiction to predict what's to come. And so in a similar way, I try to use magical realism as a device to do the same, because as I mentioned earlier, spirituality plays a really big part in my work, especially, you know, African traditional religions and spirituality. I think they're great mechanisms for exploring the past, or how I refer to it, legacy, a word that's been coming up a lot today. Family legacy, legacy of place. And I think that word legacy implies the past, but we build legacy each day. And it's something that we anticipate leaving behind for others. So for me personally, a lot of my work explores how Black women of the South are shaping their legacies for their families, for their communities, and for themselves. And it looks at the imprints that we have on this world and on this land. And now I want to extend that question to all of you. How do these themes of preservation, of evolution, and other things that we brought up, how do they present themselves in the work that you do? And Faren, I'll bring it back to you.
Well, what comes to mind with the community that I'm working with at Liberty Square is how much it is so place heavy and not just like, okay, we're dealing with this community and this place, but it is like, okay, this material community, when it is gone, what does it do to our psyche? What does it do to, you know, one's consciousness to have this you know, stable vision removed in a non-compulsory, in a compulsory way? Compulsory? Yes, in a compulsory way. So talking about evolving and preservation, when I'm just like, what I'm like trying to keep in my mind anytime that I'm like, when I'm doing research, when I'm developing, anytime I go into Liberty Square, it's, yeah, this task of preservation is always on my mind. So it's just, and it's just, that's so loaded. It's like, so who's choosing what is being preserved? You know, what are the factors at play that are even making this capturing as a form of preservation so necessary right now? And, you know, in this sense of urgency, what is being omitted? And like, there's a lot with that I contend with preservation, particularly with this community, because everything, the buildings are like literally coming down block by block. So it just becomes like this like dichotomy of like what to choose to preserve by when, and like up against this like swathing force of redevelopment. And yeah, evolution is all tied into that, you know, just looking around and I don't know, my relationship with the South and how I'm coming to step into it as my relationship and my time in the South deepens. A lot of it is like a comparison to how I feel in my environment around me, which is nature, which is like such a overwhelming, you know, relationship facet to the South. Like it's such a huge part of our existence. There's just relatively speaking, there's much less disturbance of nature than a lot of the other parts of the country. And so I just find myself, yeah, back home in Sanderson, where it is more so a undisturbed rural community. Much of my observation, how my lens as it relates to that community is just watching what evolves and by whose design, essentially. Again, it's just
Yeah. You know, Faren, you said something about deciding what gets preserved. And it reminded me of something that we spoke of in the pre-call. And I was wondering if you could speak on this as well, Rodneya, this deciding, what gets preserved for the future, and how that's kind of like played out in the exhibits that you've done.
Absolutely. So pretty much everything I do is preventative conservation. Museums are tasked with holding the histories of the world and presenting them in a way that is relevant. Going back to the manifesto of the Italian futurists and the role that they viewed literature playing in the world, that it was going to take over. It was going to progress to a point where there was a revolution of information. And we now live in the information age, in a world where things are shared so readily, that museums, the role of museums has changed to a large degree. It used to be that we were these ivory towers of information. Museums and cultural institutions would disseminate this information to all of its visitors. But now that it's ubiquitous, that everyone has this kinds of access to all of the information of the world, we instead curate. We create a platform in which to focus on something in a meaningful way. We are a moment of pause. We're an oasis in a lot of ways, because we create spaces that are inspirational, aspirational, but one of my main goals is to create a space that is relevant to the community that I serve. And because of that purpose, we are the place that has to think of where did we come from? What have we done in the past, so that we can create a more enlightened future. Just like Winston Churchill said, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So I love that Faren said that by whose design does the future come? And a lot of times that parallels with by whose money, by who has the common interest, by who has the louder microphone. So the ability to affect an environment by curating a space, I think, is absolutely essential for all creatives. Like, we are the reason that people enjoy life. When everything happened with the pandemic, we all went to art. We went to video, to film, to Instagram, to whatever creative things that we could find, because we were limited by space. But because we are now in this time of rampant information, it's beautiful that we have access to art. But it's also important that we turn the screen around and let people know that what you're taking in, what you're appreciating right now, is the same kind of thing that you're defunding in schools. It's the same kind of thing that you're taking emphasis away from, in everyday life. So let's make sure that, and one of the things that I try to always do is shine a light on not the museum as a museum, but as an institution that is available and important to absolutely everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. MJ, I would love to have you weigh in on how this makes its mark on your work.
Yeah, I think the preservation. I think the vast majority of my life and my creative work has always come from sort of a place of tension and not quite being sure when the rug is going to be pulled out from underneath me. And so I've moved a lot. And even the stuff that I choose to take with me in these moves is sort of an act of preservation and of curation. And I put a lot of stock in, like, I don't own a lot of movies, but I own a lot of magazines and books. And so the thing that, because like anyone for all intents and purposes can read a book, but like with a DVD or like a Blu-ray, you hand it to them, and then there may be a limitation there. They may not have the thing to be able to play it. So when in film, I try to find the way to make these spaces as accessible as I can, which probably sounds quite silly for anybody who's read my or watched any of my films, just because I have been accused that they're a little obtuse. But more in the sense of leaning into science fiction and knowing that there is this sort of timeline that is projected, and then figuring out how all of these layers are working together at once. Because like my world has always been influenced by the sort of, not just the aesthetics, but also the structures of science fiction. It's the thing that's kept me sane and influenced the relationships that I have. Every house that I've ever lived in, I've shot something in, with the exception of my apartment in Los Angeles, which is probably kind of revealing. It's like, nah, it's all right. It's fine. Everybody has seen those terrible blinds before in every other apartment that's existed in Los Angeles. So, but I think preservation is capturing the things that people may not consider important, and holding on to those, and finding the ways to capture those layers to show that, like, no, the South does exist as a space that is very science fiction-esque. I think most of my career has just been trying to prove to people that you should make more science fiction movies in the South and not pretend that it's somewhere else. And like everyone's like, well, the Marvel movies were shot in Georgia. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not acknowledging that it's Georgia. Like, it's just like, look at that tall, shiny metal building kind of deal. And it's just like, no. So finding, and then my favorite genre of science fiction is cyberpunk, which the sort of the father of cyberpunk is William Gibson, who in fact actually was born in South Carolina and raised in the South for the vast majority of his young adult life. And then he moved to Vancouver. But like, if you read his books, it's got like that grit, that sort of familiar, and that juxtaposition of sort of the beautiful ugly, I think is a pretty good category for cyberpunk. And then just sort of in the nuts and bolts kind of way, when I make a film, to be very intent about the types of people that work on the project, the types of characters that we're trying to explore, and the locations. Specifically in E is 4, there's a series of locations that I know by the time the film premieres, they're just not going to exist anymore. And then again, sort of leaning into that juxtaposition of these like tiny little mill houses, along with these like, we sort of like in our locales, we have like tiny mill house, like old mill factory that's been converted into really ostentatious and horrible lofts. And then like DIY skate park in where a mill used to be, but it burned down. So just kind of seeing, because my hometown used to be the textile capital of the world. And then obviously a lot of that moved out in this like the late 70s and early 80s. So I think that for me, showing that landscape, because that's between that and then just Black people in nature, not associated with slavery. It's like, yeah, no, Black people camp too. Like growing up, the only other family that would ever want to camp with me was another Black family. So just sort of those elements of showing this juxtaposition and being able to be like, hey, look, it's beautiful. And also, here are all these things that you thought were true about the South. And now I'm going to contradict you in this kind of like beautiful way that also embraces just, you know, parallel universes and not time travel per se, but like consciousness travel.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So Daneeta, I'm going to pass it to you by way of moving into the next question, because I think that there's a lot of commonalities for this answer, but also in our pre-call, we had a nice pre-call too, y'all. Sorry that you weren't invited to that one. Maybe we can extend this later. But Faren brought up this idea, and I'd love to just talk about how geography, place, and climate compel us to think past the now and look towards the future. Because growing up in Southern Louisiana, for example, hurricanes have been embedded into our culture, and living in New Orleans, especially where our infrastructure doesn't protect us, nor does our government often, there's an energy shift when a hurricane starts forming in the Gulf. There's like this blend of anxiety, sometimes excitement, determination, nostalgia. And for so many of us who are situated near the water in particular, our own survival demands anticipation of what's to come. And it also yields a certain resourcefulness and creativity that I think is unique to, being of this place. So I'd like to extend this question to each of you, but to start with Daneeta, because I think it also factors into, how do the things that we mentioned play into your work. But how does this sense of like land and climate change and these things affect your work and your ability to prepare for the future within your work, but also just in your life? How does it affect your anticipation and resourcefulness?
Well, I just loved what MJ said about how some of the things that they filmed in the science fiction is going to be gone by the time it comes out. The film comes out. And I have to say that most every geographical location that I've filmed has changed. So I've been making films here since 2008. And the first film I made was obviously in Chalmette. Destiny lives down the road, and every single location is changed, completely changed. So physical change happens fast here. I was born in a crossfire hurricane. I'm gonna just date myself here. I was born a month before Hurricane Betsy, and it completely destroyed the Mandeville, Big Branch, where I was living at the time. And so it's something that I grew up thinking that we're going to get destroyed again and again and again. It either happens through gentrification, it happens through development. It happens, through weather, and it also happens through just erosion and whatnot. So physical change happens fast, and we have to be prepared for that. I think the way I personally prepare for it is in my art, I realize that every location that I film is a preservation. It's some kind of preservation. So even if it's fiction, I'm preserving this space in a recording, because it's going to be gone, a year from now, 6 months from now. So everything I film is preservation. And then so that is my legacy as well. I'm child-free by choice. So this is my legacy is actually the art that I make. I guess everything I make, while it's not overtly about climate change, although Homeland Wetland was overtly about extraction and exploitation that led to that has led to the climate apocalypse that we're experiencing at the moment. Some of the fiction films that I made earlier, while they weren't about climate change or about climate apocalypse, it was in the background. It was always in the background. And the characters were always dealing with it. And it's usually youngsters that were dealing with it, trying to because their lives become interrupted in the middle of childhood. It's easier for us adults to deal with that. But when a child's childhood is interrupted, not just once, but maybe twice, maybe 3 times, then that has a lasting effect on our community. So everything I do is about preservation and climate change, and trying to figure out how we're going to move forward in that.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll pass it to, I feel like I keep coming back to Faren first for these. Yeah, Faren, I'll pass it back to you.
I mean, You like summed it up so well, Zandashé, just as you with the framework of this, you pretty much conveyed my thoughts on this. Like it's this idea of imminence. Like if something is sure to come, like you said, like how does that affect our relationship to the present? Yeah, with anticipation. And I'm just concerned with like, how does that just as a visual practitioner, audiovisual practitioner, like what does that look like and feel like, this idea of like reckoning with imminent forces within or beyond our control, depending on, how we see it. And so like we see it in the shorelines as they creep up, as the shores recede. Like I said, like the swathing of, that's how I view like corporate culture's effect on a lot of our communities. It's a swathing and an incremental swathing, particularly gentrification. It's just like, it's all of these like imminences and encroachment that it's just like just the amount of like minimal space for you to strategize and anticipate. And that's not necessarily, is it a privilege? Is it agony? I don't know. It depends on how one's capabilities within it and the resources they have. But I'm really interested in the ways that we can like visualize these imminent things that we have to contend with in particularly our coastal communities, southern coastal communities.
Thank you. We're going a little over our time here, but I think it's worth it for this conversation. So I do want to wrap up with this question and have MJ and Rodneya weigh in. And I'll start with you, MJ, and maybe you can also, loop in some of what you were mentioning earlier about how this kind of informs like the nuts and bolts side of filmmaking too, our actual process.
Yeah, sure. I think the preparation of always having a plan, I think that's just kind of one of the tenets of filmmaking too. I lean into it a lot, particularly as a first assistant director. I try to talk to my department heads as much as I possibly can, because the more data I have, the more that problems can go away before they actually become problems. And I think because of the South's relationship with its past, and Southern creatives with the relationships of its past, it's been this data gathering. And how do you take that information and then disseminate it in a way that is actually going to make your sets more equitable and prepare for the things that are coming for moving forward. Even with the example of COVID, like we shot this movie in December of last year. And so every detail of the film was affected by this thing. So there was a level of preparation there and a plan that had to move forward. It also sort of ties into preservation, because the film is going to be a time capsule of sorts of this type of film that was made during these unprecedented times. But yeah, I think the overall, I feel like I may have lost the thread of the question. Could you go ahead and repeat it? I'm terrible at this. It's the ADHD. My brain is like this and this. And
oh, you're great. You're great. The question was how geography, place, and climate compels us to think past the now and towards the future, but also you were speaking a bit about how all of those things inform the actual practice of filmmaking and how we do that here.
Yeah, I think having lived, the South seems to be way more prepared for a lot of things than pretty much any other region that I've lived in. And not to and maybe it's just because of the people. Yeah, not ice. Sorry, somebody just posted in the comments. But the other thing about it is it's like that also comes down to a resource thing, because it's like I'd rather have people have too much food in their refrigerators than not any at all. Like I know a lot of my friends who are like making like even with what happened to Texas, it's like that's not a thing that's supposed to happen here. And the reason that it's happening there is because of climate change and all of these other factors. But yeah, I think just knowing that the waters are going to rise, and even in and just I have friends of mine who are farmers, and even their zones are changing, so it affects the crops. It's like they were in zone 7 2 years ago, and now they're in zone 8. It's like a whole switch. I currently live in Detroit right now, which is sort of, I don't know. I feel like it's a sister city to a lot of the South because of the Great Migration. I don't know how much people from Detroit are comfortable with that concept, but that is nor here nor there. But yeah, just as water is a commodity, both the thing that is flooding us, but the thing that we need. With the Great Lakes are the largest source of fresh water in the world, and it's inherently attached to the Mississippi, to all of these other sort of thoroughfares that are the sort of the lifeblood of this part of the country. And just being aware of the things there that are factoring in and how those stories are being told. Adrienne Maree Brown has this great short story called The River, in Octavia's Brood, and it's basically just about the river having some opinions about the things that are happening in Detroit, and decides to make its voice known. And I feel like there's a lot of that energy in the South as far as nature goes. So yeah, just being prepared. And I lost the thread again, so that's fine. I'm gonna stop talking.
I think you actually I think you hit every point perfectly. Thank you. Well, Rodneya, it's only appropriate that you close us out with any final thoughts on either of those prompts.
Absolutely. Crawfish is expensive right now. Like there was a freeze, they're not as readily available. And that is a real thing that affects my life directly because I love crawfish. I love seafood. I love all of the bounty of the South. I love Southern food. I love Southern trees and environments. And a lot of it, we are on the front line of climate change. We are the people who will be most affected by all of these fluctuations. And so we are adaptable because we have always had to be, but we are getting to a point where even with our adaptation, it's not going to be enough. So having these conversations now, bringing light to things that are important. Unfortunately, there's a lot of really difficult conversations that we have to have with family and friends and people in our world. The South has adopted anti-intellectualism, anti-science thinking, not feeling that we have ownership of ourselves and our land and our people. And because of a lot of these really deeply held false narratives, we are on the precipice of experiencing a lot of loss. And as a museum professional, and our goal, our life is preventative conservation. It is working towards maintaining that history. It's a difficult time, but I feel that enough people are becoming aware that there can be some kind of a changing point. There can be important conversations by people who can actually affect a change. We're also looking at our history, at the things that have happened. For instance, we're going to be bringing in a Smithsonian Green Book exhibition to the museum in the fall. And we are also showing a film about driving while Black. And it shows that there is a short history that at one point in time, this narrative was how we were able to traverse the land. And now there are still barriers, but we've seen imminent growth. And because we've been able to take hold of our future and to whatever degree gain a better, a wider, a more influential platform, we can see actual change happening. Maybe it's late, maybe it's low, maybe it's not going to save the world at this moment, but if it slows it down, it could maybe last as long as our kids, and maybe they come up with the next concept to how this becomes a better world. Ultimately, we are responsible for our future, and we are responsible to maintain and enrich our artistic present. And if we don't do that, we're not going to have a future worth living.